Elation at the discovery of wet gas by French company Total right off the coast of Mossel Bay. President Cyril Ramaphosa described it as a game changer for our energy security. He's promised the project will be corruption-free and properly regulated by government. So let's look at the facts. 1 billion barrels of wet gas. It's a massive reserve on the Outeniqua Basin. It can be converted into electricity or petrol. It's the biggest ever find in South Africa, creating jobs and revenue. Investors will pay 28% corporate tax, 5% royalty on all gross sales, and the state will benefit from the licensing. But activists warn against what's dubbed as the resource curse. Local communities in developing countries are marginalized and left impoverished as multinationals and political elites wallow in cash. Now, these countries have made a killing in oil, diamonds and minerals and natural gas, but they're mired in poverty and conflict. Equatorial Guinea makes billions, but has one of the lowest rates of baby immunization. Nigeria is divided between a small elite class and mass poverty. DRC, Liberia, Ivory Coast all have violent conflicts over blood diamonds. Angola has huge wealth and low development. Communities in Malawi and Uganda have lost their land. In Ghana and Tanzania, there are huge dropout rates from school, with children working as illegal miners. So, will South Africans benefit from the discovery of gas at Mossel Bay, or will we also doomed to suffer the resource curse? We have in the studio Niall Kramer of the South African Oil and Gas Alliance and Samantha Hargreaves, Director of Women African Alliance. Welcome, both of you. What are we looking at here, Niall Kramer? Is it good for us?
I certainly hope so. You spoke about all of the numbers there. It's the biggest find in the past year globally. Last year, ExxonMobil had the biggest find. So I think this potentially is very significant for us. But the key here is that there is gas under the sea. That still needs to be produced. We have a bit of a window here, whether that's 3, 5, 10 years, and the key to this is to be ready for that, whether that's ready in terms of skills, business capacity, infrastructure, the social issues you're talking about here. So we do need to use this window, and you raise this issue of, is this a curse or is it a blessing? And the reality is that it could be either of those. And they're very good examples. They're not good examples in Africa, other than a few that are relatively small. But there are good examples around the world, and there are bad examples around the
Middle
world.
East is
so
another good example of how bad it can be.
Well, there are examples of how good it can be as well. And the key thing here is that South Africa is facing this triple challenge of jobs, inequality, poverty, all the issues in the NDP, and all of the social issues that we face. Now, we can have aspirations to address those, but here we potentially have some concrete wealth that could underpin programs around those. So it's very, very significant.
We just have to do it right. I mean, what did you think, Samantha, when you heard about this find and the potential impact that it could have?
Well, I guess the first question that came up for me was around the climate. And I think for anyone living in the world today that's conscious of the climate and ecological crisis, this discovery indicates a treacherous road for people, but a very treacherous road for the planet. At this stage, the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, warned us in November last year, just ahead of the COP in Poland, that we had 12 years to get climate emissions under control, or we would
What
face...
sort of impact is this likely to have from an emissions point of view and the sort of damage?
So essentially what the IPCC, which is an eminent panel of scientists, have told us for years, but they re-emphasized this in November, and that was to say that we have 12 years to get carbon emissions under the belt. And essentially what they're saying is, before it was all new deposits we should not exploit. But actually now what is being said, existing discoveries that are currently in exploitation should not be exploited further. So actually what this suggests, the biggest discovery in the last year suggests terrible things for the planet and for the people living on the planet. So I think just from a climate perspective, we should not be exploiting these reserves. There are many, many other ways in which we can be thinking about alternative energy, energy that is good for people, good for the planet, good for the ecology. And so this is what we should be looking at.
I mean, sadly, when it comes to the sort of amount of money and big business, it kind of bulldozes over any environmental concerns. But how do you think this should be played so that some of these concerns, or most of these concerns, are addressed and everyone benefits and their emissions are kept to a low? Because I should imagine nothing's going to stop it.
I think that last part is true, is that I do think this is going to happen. I think that the good side of this is that it is gas. And gas has got a 50% lower CO2 footprint against coal. It doesn't have ash that blows around. So it does have a significant environmental and CO2 impact in bringing it down. Yes, it is still a fossil fuel. Now, in South Africa, we have the electricity plan called the IRP, the Integrated Resource Plan, which is out. It's a draft at the moment. The final hasn't been publicized. But the essential movements in that are rational, they're data-led, and while coal might remain flat, the role for gas is up, and the space for renewables is significantly up. And potentially the role for gas in this could be to support renewables. So it's the industry is often characterized as being anti-renewables, which is just absolute nonsense. The use of renewables at what's called utility scale, very large scale, is going to need gas to underpin it. So when the sun's not shining, the wind is not blowing, and you're in the Highveld, for example, up here, on a winter afternoon, if you're in Eskom, you have to start loading coal pretty early in the afternoon. Whereas if you have gas in the system, you can switch that on pretty quickly.
Okay, now look, it'll certainly, excuse me, help our energy problems. I'm just wondering, again, going back to sort of, social issues here, how the community will benefit from this, because often they're the ones on the fringes. I don't know what the deal is as far as bringing in a workforce. Are we up to it, for it, in South Africa?
Well, I think the big question we have to ask is that often we sold these big projects, these big energy projects, these big infrastructure projects, because they punted to create jobs, to bring development. And our experience is actually the converse. So there's actually been some very interesting analysis done in the US just a year ago and published by the Huffington Post. And that was that off the Atlantic, if they actually moved away from offshore drilling and they invested in offshore wind, it would create twice as many jobs and would create twice as much electricity. So I think we really have to ask questions about what type of development these big projects bring. So for us, if you're looking at the externalized costs, both social and environmental, of these types of big projects, we should be thinking of scaling down. We should be thinking of renewable energy. And in fact, South Africa could be leading the way there, continentally and globally, around renewable energy.
We're still pushing coal, so that's going to take...
So we're making massive investments in coal. Now we're looking at gas and oil. And sure, gas might be considered a less polluting fossil fuel than oil, but it is polluting nonetheless. And the scientists have concluded we have to keep these reserves underground. We already have faced a 1-degree change in temperature since pre-industrial levels. And we look at the crisis that the world is sitting with today.
So, I mean, the crisis, and I mean, I think the problem here is that there are always two sides, aren't there? And just that they hardly agree or meet in the middle. I mean, this paradox of plenty that comes with finding something like this, I heard it being described as, it impacts on having less economic growth in a country, less democracy, worse development outcomes. Why do you think that happens? Do you think there's so much money that actually you don't really have to listen to anybody?
No, I think there's a lot of rhetoric out there. You talk about experience and, the experience of perhaps in the US offshore versus renewables. In the South African situation, it's not really an oil and gas or renewables issue. It's against the reality, which is baseload coal at the moment. Now, In the case of the Mossel Bay find, there is in fact a plant right there that could run this, it could be a lifeline to them. It could go into the power system. We have a number of what are called peaking stations which were built to run on diesel. Now the reality is we could switch those over to gas fairly, they do have some adjustments to be made, but it's a relatively easy thing to do. So while...
Sorry, get it right, I mean it'll be good for our energy supply, won't it?
It'll be good for our energy supply. It'll also be good for our balance of payments. It'll have a payback that's relatively short. But to come back to this issue of renewables, it's not an anti-renewable position. This is an enabler for renewables. And in the modelling that's been done in the IRP, it's on a least cost, least regret basis. And the reality is that we're going to have an energy mix for quite a while to come. The concerns are, yes, of course, they're driven by the Kyoto Protocol and the COP and various agreements that we've signed. But there's a reality of a lot of jobs and union pressure in coal. And the one area where I think the narrative can be improved is what is the just or the better transition going to be from coal in terms of those jobs, and where coal miners lose jobs, where are those jobs? Those jobs are in renewables. There's no question about that. They do generate a number of jobs.
Okay, how do you, talking of jobs, keep the community linked to this project so that we don't lose it? It's not outsourced international skills, which I'm sure many will be brought over, but that we don't lose out to international talent.
Well, on projects such as this, the idea that jobs get created, I think we must interrogate this. A lot of the jobs in the rigs are for professional people. There's a small number of low-paid, low-skilled jobs on the rigs. If we were to put that against other development possibilities in renewable energies, but also in the just transition. So Neil is talking about the need for transition. I think all of us will agree, but what is the nature and form of that just transition, and who benefits in that just transition? So we are continuing to see massive investments of the state in coal. I don't see a commitment to the just transition. Sure, gas could be a feature in the just transition, but right now we do not have a visionary position or state leading on a just transition. And the just transition can create jobs. It can create livelihoods for people. But we're sitting with a lethal combination of coal, now gas and oil, and nuclear, all in the IRP and in the picture. And in fact, if you speak to communities across the country that are carrying the burden of energy poverty, that are carrying the costs of dirty energy but seeing none of the benefits of it, they are interrogating and they're challenging the state and the ANC about the energy plan.
Well, the one area that and I think there are more than one, but the one I want to highlight, area that we would agree is on the need to develop a shared energy vision into the future amongst the multiple stakeholder groups that are out there. That's the one piece. Coming back to the jobs issue, there are very highly skilled jobs on rigs, and there will be some technician, artisan type jobs. Those we do need to get ready for. But the big job creation is going to be in the downstream effects of having affordable, abundant energy that is reliable. There have been a number, and the reality is that we are an industrial country that is needing to re-industrialize. And we've had to turn away massive investments on the basis that we haven't got
now, I'm going to stop you there. We've run out of time.
Oh.
But yes, we have.
Come back tomorrow.
It's a big topic, isn't it? Niall Crewe and Samantha Hargreaves, thank you for talking to us. Obviously, an important topic. Thank you. That's our show for tonight. Coming up next, though, Checkpoint investigates why police officers are killing themselves and each other at an alarming rate, and how the service is handling this violent femicide-suicide trend.